Cole Brannigan hadn't slept in 31 hours. That wasn't unusual. Sleep had never been kind to him. Not since he was 12 and watched his father's truck slide off the Clarksville Bridge in a rainstorm that the weatherman had called mild. Not since he came back from 2 tours in Fallujah with more metal in his shoulder than bone, more nightmares than memories worth keeping. And certainly not since a judge in Portland, Oregon sat behind a mahogany desk 7 years ago and told him in a voice as flat and indifferent as a parking ticket that he was not a suitable environment for his own daughter. He sat on his Harley outside Ironside Bar and Grill, a roadhouse on the southern edge of Nashville that sat back from the highway like something that didn't want to be found. The building was low and wide and made of cinder block that had been painted black so many times the layers had built up like geological strata, each coat covering the scars and graffiti of the previous decade. The neon sign above the door buzzed and flickered, casting red light across the gravel parking lot in unsteady pulses like a heartbeat that couldn't decide if it wanted to keep going. The place smelled like diesel fuel and regret that had aged past the point of being useful. His hands were wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. He wasn't drinking it. He was holding it because holding something kept his hands from shaking, and shaking was the one thing Cole Brannigan refused to do in public. 40 brothers milled around the lot. Friday night, engines ticking as they cooled. Somebody had a Bluetooth speaker wired to the back of a saddlebag playing Waylon Jennings loud enough to rattle the windows of the bar. The usual. Hammer. You coming in, or you going to marry that cup? That was Riggs. 26 years old. Loud. Still young enough to believe every night was a celebration and every morning was someone else's problem. Cole didn't answer. He was watching something. Across the lot near the dumpsters where the parking lot light had burned out 3 weeks ago and nobody had gotten around to fixing it, something moved. Small, low to the ground. He thought it was a dog at first. Strays wandered through the lot, all the time skinny mutts looking for scraps tossed out the kitchen door. But dogs don't have blonde hair. Cole set the coffee on the seat of his bike and stood up. 6'3", 240 pounds. Beard going salt and pepper at the jaw. Arms sleeved in ink from wrist to shoulder, every image a story he had stopped telling years ago. The patch on his back read Hell's Angels Nashville in letters big enough to read from the highway. He took 3 steps toward the dumpsters and stopped. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 3 years old, maybe younger. Hard to tell because she was so thin that her bones pressed against her skin like tent poles under canvas. Her feet were bare and black with grime. She wore a t-shirt 3 sizes too big that hung past her knees, and she was clutching something against her chest. A stuffed bear. Soaked through, missing one eye. She wasn't running, she wasn't hiding, she was walking straight toward him with the kind of purpose that doesn't belong on a face that small. Hey, hold on. His voice came out wrong, too rough. The gravel of a man who talked to engines and bar counters and the insides of his own skull, more than he talked to people. He heard it and tried again, softer this time, the way you lower your hand when you're reaching for something fragile. Hey there, sweetheart, you okay? She stopped 4 feet away and looked up. Her eyes were gray-blue and enormous in her small face, the kind of eyes that had already cataloged too much of the world and filed it all under the heading of things that hurt. Cole recognized that look. He'd been wearing it for 30 years. She opened her mouth. What came out was barely louder than breathing. I don't have a place to sleep tonight. 7 words, 7 small words from a voice that hadn't learned to be loud yet, and Cole felt something shift behind his ribs. Not metaphorically, something physical. Some wall he'd spent decades building brick by careful brick to keep the world from reaching the parts of him that still knew how to feel. It didn't crack, it collapsed, all at once. Like a dam that had been holding back an ocean it was never strong enough to contain. He went down on one knee, slowly, the way you kneel when a bird lands on your hand and you know that any sudden movement will send it flying back into a sky that has never once been kind to it. What's your name, darling Gracie? Gracie, that's a real pretty name. Where's your mama, Gracie? The girl didn't answer. She squeezed the bear tighter, and her fingers dug into the matted fur like she was holding on to the last solid thing in a world that had gone liquid. Behind Cole, the noise had stopped. The Waylon Jennings was still playing from the speaker, but nobody was talking. 40 bikers, most of them over 200 pounds, most of them carrying records that would fill a filing cabinet, most of them men the world had taught children to cross the street to avoid. Every single one of them was staring at this tiny girl in complete silence. Bear, who ran the kitchen and hadn't cried since his mother's funeral, in 1987 was already wiping his eyes with a dish towel. Riggs had his phone halfway out of his pocket before he knew what he was going to do with it. And Walt Mercer, Robert Walter Mercer, president of the Nashville chapter for 14 years, 61 years old, grandfather of four, walked out of the bar with a bourbon in his hand, saw what was happening, and set the glass down on the gravel, like it had just become the least important object in the known universe. Hammer. Walt's voice was low controlled. What do we got, little girl? Cole said it without looking up, alone, no shoes, no parents. Walt knelt beside Cole, his knees popped. He didn't care. He looked at Gracie, and Gracie looked at him, measuring him the way she'd been measuring everything for 12 days, calculating whether this new face meant food or danger. How long you been by yourself, sweetheart? She held up fingers, tried to count, got confused, held up both hands, all fingers spread. 10 days, Cole asked. She shook her head. Then she held up two more fingers on one hand. 12 days, Walt whispered. 12 goddamn days. Cole's jaw tightened until the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. 12 days. A 3-year-old child alone on the streets of Nashville for 12 days in October. The nights had been dipping into the low 40s. She should have been dead. By every rational measure of survival, by every statistic, by every cold equation the world uses to calculate the odds of a child lasting alone in a city that doesn't notice the people sleeping in its doorways, Gracie Dawson should have been dead. But she was standing in front of him, holding a one-eyed bear, asking a Hell's Angel for somewhere to sleep. Cole locked everything down. Whatever was happening inside him, whatever was breaking and flooding and rearranging, he sealed it behind the only skill the Marine Corps had given him that was worth a damn. Compartmentalization. This child did not need his grief. She did not need his rage. She needed his calm. Okay, Gracie, you're going to be safe now, you hear me? Nobody's going to hurt you. She stared at him for a long time, those gray-blue eyes moving across his face, reading him the way a child who has been alone reads everything, looking for the light, looking for the angle, looking for the moment when the kindness turns. Then she said 3 more words that turned everything sideways. They're watching me. Cole's eyes snapped up. Every instinct from Fallujah came back in a single heartbeat. Threat assessment, entry points, sight lines, blind spots. The parking lot was open on 3 sides. The tree line to the east was dark. The road was empty. Who's watching you, Gracie? The black car. They come every day. They look at the kids. Walt stepped forward. What black car? Honey, a big one with dark windows. 2 men. One has a wolf on his hand. She pointed to the inside of her wrist. Right here. A mean wolf with teeth. The silence that followed was different from the first one. The first silence was shock. This silence was the sound of 40 men arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously and not one of them liking it. Cole looked at Walt. Walt looked at Cole. No words were exchanged. They didn't need words. A 40-year friendship built on the worst roads and the darkest nights doesn't need words. They both knew exactly what a black SUV with tinted windows circling homeless children meant. They'd heard the stories. Different cities, different years. The same ancient evil wearing a new coat of paint. Riggs, Walt didn't turn around. His voice carried the weight of command that comes from years of being the man other men look to when the world tilts. Yeah, Walt, get me the chapter phone now, on it, Bear. Right here, Walt. Take this little girl inside. Get her soup. Get her water. Get her warm. And you do not let her out of your sight. Not for 1 second. You hear me? I got her, Walt. I got her. Bear stepped forward. 6'5", 310 pounds. Hands like baseball mitts. A face that had scared debt collectors and ex-girlfriends, and one very unfortunate repo man who'd made the mistake of touching his motorcycle. He knelt down and held out those massive hands to Gracie with a tenderness that would have stunned anyone who had ever seen him throw a punch. Gracie looked at Cole first, looked at him hard. She was asking permission. She was asking if this enormous stranger was safe. She was asking with eyes that had learned to ask without words because words had never protected her from anything. Cole nodded. He's a good man, Gracie. He's going to get you some supper. I'll be right behind you. Okay. Gracie walked to Bear and raised her arms. The gesture was so small and so trusting that it stopped the breath of every man who saw it. This child, who had every reason to fear large strangers, who had spent 12 days learning that the world was populated primarily by people who did not see her, and secondarily by people who saw her for the wrong reasons, lifted her arms to a man who looked like he could bench press a motorcycle and asked without words to be held. When he picked her up, she weighed nothing, literally nothing. He had carried engine blocks heavier than this child. He could feel every rib through the oversized t-shirt, each one distinct beneath his fingers, like the keys of a piano could feel the sharp architecture of shoulder blades and the knobbed line of a spine that had no business being this prominent on a body this young. She was a blueprint of bones wearing skin. Something inside this enormous man broke so quietly that nobody heard it but him, a fracture that ran from his chest to the back of his throat and made the air taste like copper. He carried her inside through the bar door and past the counter and into the warm light, and his tears fell into her hair, and he didn't wipe them, and he didn't apologize, because some moments are too honest for either. Inside, the bar shifted into a different mode. Jolene Mercer, Walt's wife, the woman everybody called Jo, appeared from the back office like she had a sixth sense for children in trouble. She took one look at Gracie, and her face went through 4 emotions in 2 seconds before settling on the 5th. Absolute purpose. Get me a blanket, a real one, not a bar rag, and heat up that chicken soup from today, not the microwave. Put it on the stove. I want it warm, not hot. She'll burn her mouth. Yes, ma'am, said the bartender, who was already moving before she finished the sentence. Jo knelt in front of Gracie, who was now perched on a bar stool that was comically enormous beneath her. Hi, baby girl. I'm Jo. You want me to hold that bear for you while you eat? Gracie pulled the bear closer. He's wet. I know he is, sweetheart. How about we dry him off? We'll put him right next to the heater, and he'll be warm and fluffy in no time. Would that be okay? Gracie considered this with the grave seriousness that only a 3-year-old can bring to a decision about a stuffed animal. Then she held the bear out. His name is Sergeant. Sergeant. Jo took the bear like it was made of crystal. That's a brave name. We'll take good care of Sergeant. I promise. Outside, the parking lot had become a command center. Walt stood in the center of a circle of men, phone pressed to his ear. He was calling chapter leaders across the region. Knoxville, Memphis, Chattanooga, Clarksville. His voice was low and measured, but every man within earshot could hear the steel underneath it, the same steel that had held this chapter together through raids and recessions and funerals, and the slow erosion of a world that had never quite known what to do with men like them. I need eyes on every highway, on-ramp, off-ramp, and rest stop from Nashville to the state line. Black SUV, dark tint, 2 males, one with a wolf tattoo on the right wrist. This is not a drill. This is not a maybe. There's a 3-year-old girl in my clubhouse who just told me men in a black truck are hunting children. You call everyone, everyone. Within 20 minutes, over 200 members had been activated across Middle Tennessee. Within the hour, the number climbed past 400. By midnight, nearly 600 Hells Angels across the entire state were awake, alert, and watching. But here's what mattered. Here's the thing that separated what happened that night from every outlaw story ever told in a bar, or a courtroom, or a newspaper headline. Nobody went looking for a fight. Walt made that clear from the first phone call. We are not vigilantes tonight. We are witnesses. We watch, we document, we report. Anybody who throws a punch, anybody who plays hero, you answer to me. And you know what that means. They knew what it meant. So 600 men, former Marines, Army veterans, mechanics, truckers, factory workers, men who had grown up hard and lived harder, spread out across Nashville and the surrounding counties with cell phones, dash cameras, and a discipline that would have impressed any military commander on earth. They communicated through a phone tree older than most of their bikes. Chapter to chapter, brother to brother, hand signal to hand signal, and they waited. Inside Ironside, Gracie had finished her soup, all of it. Jo said later that the child ate like someone who expected the bowl to be taken away at any moment. Fast, protective, one arm curled around it like a shield. After the soup, Gracie's eyes started getting heavy. Jo carried her to the back room, the one they used for chapter meetings with the long table and the mismatched wooden chairs and laid her down on the old leather couch with two blankets and Sergeant the Bear, now mostly dry and positioned right next to her pillow. Cole walked in just as Gracie was fading. He stood in the doorway and filled the entire frame. This massive tattooed man with a face that had made grown adults cross the street in 3 states. And he couldn't move. Because the sight of that tiny girl clean and warm and finally safe with her small hand wrapped around a stuffed bear's paw had paralyzed him in a way that no bullet, no blade, no courtroom verdict ever had. Cole. Gracie's voice was barely a murmur, half gone already. Yeah, darling, I'm right here. Are you going to be here when I wake up? The question destroyed him. It destroyed him because he knew. He knew with every broken piece of himself that nobody had been there when she woke up for 12 days. 12 mornings a 3-year-old opened her eyes and saw concrete and strangers in the slow grinding terror of being completely alone in a world that had decided she didn't exist. I'm going to be right here, right in this chair. I'm not going anywhere. Promise, I promise, Gracie. She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. And for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, Gracie Dawson slept without flinching. Cole sat down in the wooden chair next to the couch. He didn't move. He didn't check his phone. He sat there and watched a child breathe, and something that had been dead inside him for a very long time, something he had buried so deep he'd forgotten it was there, began to stir. Walt appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. Hammer. Yeah, I just got off the phone with Nate Pritchard. Cole looked up. Nate Pritchard was a name he hadn't heard in 2 years. Former ATF burned out after 8 years undercover, now working private, specializing in human trafficking cases. He'd crossed paths with the Nashville chapter before, once on opposite sides of a courtroom, twice on the same side of a much uglier line. Nate says there's been a pattern. Black SUV, matching our description, spotted near 3 different homeless encampments in the past month. 2 near the I-40 underpass. 1 near the rail yard off Charlotte Avenue. Cole's expression didn't change, but his hands closed into fists on his knees. Kids, always kids. Specifically kids that nobody's looking for. No parents, no caseworkers, no files. Ghost children, Nate calls them. Children the system doesn't know exist. How many? Nate thinks at least 14 based on photos he's pulled from traffic cameras. Maybe more. 14 children. Yeah. Cole stood up from the chair, looked at Gracie one more time, memorized the rhythm of her breathing, the way a soldier memorizes the terrain before moving into hostile ground, and walked out of the room. When he passed Walt in the doorway, he put his hand on the older man's shoulder and squeezed once. Hard. We're going to find them, Cole said. Every last one. I know we are. And Walt, when we do, when we hand this to the cops and the feds and whoever else shows up with a badge, I want Gracie to know she did this. I want her to know that she walked up to a stranger in a parking lot and whispered, and it mattered. Because someone should have told that kid a long time ago that her voice matters. Walt nodded slowly. It's 1 in the morning, Hammer. Go sit with her. Cole walked back into the room and took his seat in the wooden chair. Gracie shifted in her sleep, mumbling something he couldn't quite hear. He leaned closer. Sergeant's hungry, she whispered. Cole looked at the bear, looked at the little girl, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Cole Brannigan smiled. Outside across Nashville, 600 engines stayed silent. 600 men stayed awake. And somewhere on a dark highway, a black SUV with tinted windows was driving straight into a trap it didn't know existed. Set not by police, not by federal agents, but by the last people on earth anyone would expect to save a child. Gracie breathed in, Gracie breathed out, and the chair didn't move. Cole's phone buzzed at 1:47 a.m. He grabbed it fast, killing the vibration before it could disturb Gracie. The screen read Riggs. He stepped 2 feet from the couch, no further, and answered in a whisper. Talk. Hammer, we got a hit. Rattler and his boys spotted a black SUV parked behind the Shell station on Dickerson Pike. Engine running, tinted windows, plates match what Nate Pritchard pulled from the traffic cam footage. Cole's free hand gripped the back of the wooden chair. The wood creaked under his fingers. How many inside, can't tell. Windows too dark. But it hasn't moved in 20 minutes, just sitting there. And Hammer, there's a tent camp about 200 yards east of that station under the Dickerson overpass. Kids, at least 4 or 5 from what Rattler can see. Cole closed his eyes. His pulse was steady, combat steady. The kind of calm that only comes when the stakes are so high that your body decides panic is a luxury it cannot afford. Nobody moves, Cole said. Nobody approaches that vehicle. You hear me, Riggs? Already told him. Rattler's got 3 guys in the Waffle House parking lot across the street. They're recording. Dash cams, phone cams, everything. Good. Call Nate Pritchard. Wake him up if you have to. Tell him Dickerson Pike Shell Station. And tell him to bring whatever law enforcement contact he trusts. Not the whole department. Someone he trusts. Got it. Cole hung up and looked back at Gracie. She hadn't moved. Sargent was tucked under her chin, and her breathing was the slow, even rhythm of a child who had finally found something solid enough to rest against. He walked to the doorway and found Walt leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, not sleeping, not remotely close to sleeping. Dickerson Pike. I heard. I was listening through the wall. Walt, this is bigger than 2 guys in a truck. I know it is. Nate said 14 kids in the photos. 14. That's not a couple of predators cruising around. That's an operation. That's supply and demand. That's routes and buyers and schedules and someone making phone calls. Walt rubbed his face with both hands. The weariness of a man who had been carrying other men's burdens for 14 years and had just been handed the heaviest one yet. I called Ray Torres in Memphis 30 minutes ago. He said his chapter spotted a similar vehicle 2 weeks back near a youth shelter off Poplar Avenue. They didn't think much of it at the time. Now he's thinking different. Memphis to Memphis. Knoxville. And Ray thinks maybe Chattanooga. Same description. Black SUV, heavy tint. Always near kids. Always at night. Cole leaned against the opposite wall and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed above him, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly worse than it is. The weight of it was staggering. Not just tonight, not just Gracie, but how long this had been happening while everyone looked the other way. How many Gracies were out there right now, sleeping under bridges, invisible to a world that had already decided they didn't count? We need Nate here, Cole said, physically here. Tonight. He's the only one who can bridge this to the feds without us looking like vigilantes playing cop. Already done, he's on his way. 40 minutes out. And Walt. We need to talk about Gracie. What about her when the sun comes up? Somebody's going to notice she's here. CPS cops, somebody. And they're going to take her. You know they are. They're going to put her right back into the same system that lost her in the first place. Walt was quiet for a long time. The hallway was narrow and dark and smelled like old wood and spilled beer and the kind of history that gets into the walls of a place and never leaves. One problem at a time, Hammer. Right now the problem is that black SUV. Cole nodded, but he filed it away because he had made a promise to a 3-year-old girl that he would be there when she woke up. And Cole Brannigan had broken many things in his life. Bottles and bones and hearts and the trust of people who had deserved better. But he had never not once broken a promise to a child. At 2:15 a.m., Nate Pritchard walked into Ironside Bar, looking like he hadn't slept in a calendar week, which was probably accurate. He was a thin man, mid-50s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face you would never look at twice in a grocery store line. That was the whole point. Nate had spent 8 years undercover for the ATF, becoming people who didn't exist, walking into rooms where the wrong word meant a shallow grave. The best thing about him was that he looked like a man who did other people's taxes. Where's the girl? Nate said the moment he stepped through the door. Sleeping, Cole said. Back room. She's safe. I need to talk to her. Not tonight, you don't. Nate stopped walking. He looked at Cole and something passed between them. The old tension, the old respect, the understanding that they operated on different sides of a line that existed only in theory and disappeared completely when children were involved. Cole, if she can describe those men in any more detail. She's 3 years old, Nate. She gave us a black SUV, dark-tinted windows, and a wolf tattoo on her wrist. That's more than most adult witnesses manage in a month. She's done enough for tonight. Nate held up his hands. Okay, fair enough. Show me what you've got. They sat at a corner table. Cole, Walt, Nate, and Bear, who had positioned himself in the doorway of the back room and refused with a physical stubbornness that bordered on geological to be more than one room away from Gracie. Walt spread out a paper map of Nashville old school, the kind you used to find folded wrong in the glove compartment of every truck in Tennessee, and started marking locations with a red pen. Here's where Gracie says she first saw the SUV, near the camp under the I-40 bridge at Charlotte Avenue. She says they came 3 times in one day. 3 times, Nate repeated. They were scouting her specifically. That's what I think. Here's where Rattler spotted them tonight. Dickerson Pike Shell Station, near another camp. Nate leaned forward and studied the marks. Then he pulled out his own phone and opened a file. Photographs, timestamps, license plate captures. Grainy but clear enough to tell a story that made the room feel smaller. These are the traffic cam hits I've been collecting for the past 6 weeks, Nate said. I didn't have enough to take to the FBI. I had a theory and a handful of blurry photographs. But now with a living witness and real-time surveillance from your guys, this changes everything. How fast can you get the feds involved? Walt asked. I've got a contact in the FBI's Nashville field office, agent named Rachel Sinclair. She runs the trafficking task force. I can have her on the phone in an hour. But Walt, I need something from you first. Name it. I need your guys to stay invisible. Every single one of them. If these traffickers smell a setup, they'll dump the vehicle, burn the phones, and vanish. And the next time they surface, it'll be in another state with another set of kids that nobody's looking for. My guys are already invisible, Walt said. We've been doing this since before you carried a badge, Nate. Nate almost smiled. I know you have. That's why I'm here, and not at the bureau office. At 2:38 a.m., Cole's phone buzzed again. A text from a number he didn't recognize. He showed it to Walt. SUV moving, heading south on Dickerson. 2 bikes following at distance. Rattler says they're heading toward the I-40 underpass. Cole stood so fast the chair nearly tipped. That's the big camp, he said. That's where the most kids are. Nate was already dialing. Rachel, it's Nate Pritchard. I need you to listen carefully. I don't have time to walk you through everything, but I'm going to give you a location, a vehicle description, and a plate number, and I need you to have a team ready to move in the next 30 minutes. This is not a drill. We're watching a suspected trafficking vehicle heading toward a known encampment of unaccompanied minors right now. Cole couldn't hear the response, but Nate's face told him everything he needed to know. The FBI was listening. Walt Cole said, tell our guys at the I-40 camp to hold position. Eyes only. Nobody engages. Already texting. And tell them to count the kids. I want to know exactly how many children are under that bridge right now, because when this is over, I want every single one of them accounted for. Walt sent the message. 30 seconds later, the reply came back. 11 kids under the bridge. Youngest looks about 7, oldest maybe 14. 3 are awake, the rest are sleeping. Cole felt his stomach fold in on itself. 11 children living under a highway overpass in the richest country on earth, and a vehicle full of predators was heading straight toward them. Bear appeared in the doorway. His voice was careful, controlled the voice of a man trying not to shatter something fragile. Hammer, she's awake, Cole turned. Gracie, she woke up. She's calling for you. Cole looked at Walt, looked at Nate, looked at the map with its red marks, looked at his phone with its urgent messages. Then he walked away from all of it and went to the back room. Gracie was sitting up on the couch. Sergeant clutched to her chest, eyes wide. The room was dim and her face was a small, pale oval in the shadows. Hey, darling. Cole knelt beside her. Bad dream. She shook her head. I heard talking. Loud talking. That's just my friends making plans. Nothing to worry about. You're safe, Cole. Yeah, the wolf man. Is he coming here? His throat tightened. No, Gracie. He's never coming near you again. I promise you that. She pulled Sergeant closer. He took a boy from the camp last week. A boy named Ethan. He was 9. He talked to me sometimes. He shared his crackers with me. Her voice cracked for the first time. Not crying, cracking, like thin ice under too much weight, holding but barely the fracture lines spreading in every direction. Ethan told me to run. He said, Gracie, when you see the black car, you run. And I ran, but Ethan didn't. Cole couldn't speak. He knelt there and his hands gripped his own knees so hard his knuckles went white. A 9-year-old boy sleeping under a highway, sharing his food with a 3-year-old girl, teaching her the survival lessons that no child should ever need to know. And then one night the black car came, and the boy who shared his crackers didn't run fast enough. I'll find Ethan, Cole said. and he meant it with every damaged, scarred, broken piece of his soul. Gracie lay back down. Sergeant says he believes you. Good. Sergeant's smart, Cole. Yeah, I raged for a long time. I frayed until my feet hurt, and then I saw your motorcycles, and I thought motorcycles are loud. If I stand near loud people, maybe the quiet car can't find me. Cole bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted copper. A 3-year-old's survival logic. Stand near something loud enough to drown out the thing hunting you. Find the biggest, noisiest, most frightening thing in the world and hide behind it because the monster chasing you is quieter, and that makes it worse. You were right, Gracie. You were so right. He sat with her until she fell back asleep. 2 minutes. She was running on fumes, body and soul held together by the fragile scaffolding of one stranger's promise and a one-eyed bear named Sergeant. When he stepped back into the main room, his face was different. Everyone saw it. Walt saw it. Nate saw it. Bear saw it. The bartender saw it from 20 feet away and set down the glass he was polishing. Cole's voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. There's a boy named Ethan, 9 years old. He was taken from the I-40 camp sometime last week. He was Gracie's friend. He told her to run. He shared his crackers with her. Cole paused. So now we're not just watching a vehicle. We're looking for a missing child. Nate, tell your FBI contact that. Tell her there's a name, a face, a kid who shared his crackers with a 3-year-old and then got taken while she ran. Nate was already dialing. Walt picked up the red pen and drew a circle around the I-40 underpass. I'm calling every chapter within 200 miles. Every truck stop, every rest area, every motel where a scared kid might be held. We have his age. We have his name. That's enough to start. At 3:04 a.m., Cole's phone rang. Rattler's voice was sharp and fast. Hammer. The SUV just pulled off the road, quarter mile from the I-40 camp. Headlights off, engine still running. There are two. Wait, hold on. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. 3. There's 3 of them. Third guy just got out of the back seat. He's carrying something, looks like a duffel bag. What's in the bag can't tell from here. But Hammer, he's walking toward the camp on foot. The other 2 are staying with the vehicle. Cole looked at Walt. Their eyes locked. How close is Rachel Sinclair's team, Cole asked. Walt checked his phone. Rachel says 15 minutes. 15 minutes is too long, I know. If that man reaches those kids. I know, Hammer. Cole pressed the phone back to his ear. Rattler, do not let that man reach those children. I don't care what you have to do. Block the path. Pretend you're drunk. Start a fight with one of your guys. Make noise. Make a scene. But that man does not touch a single kid. Copy that. 60 seconds later, Rattler and 2 brothers stumbled out of the shadows near the camp, laughing too loud, shoving each other, performing the most convincing display of drunken stupidity Nashville had ever witnessed. They staggered directly into the path between the man with the duffel bag and the camp, close enough that the man would have to walk through them or around them, and neither option was subtle. The man stopped. He looked at the 3 bikers weaving and hollering in the dark. He turned around and walked quickly back toward the SUV. He's retreating, Rattler reported. Back to the vehicle. Moving fast, don't follow on foot. Get to your bikes. If that SUV runs, we need to know where it goes. Already on it. The SUV pulled away from the shoulder and accelerated south. 3 sets of headlights followed at careful distance. Rattler's crew, running dark engines low, spread across 2 lanes to avoid looking like a convoy. At 3:11 a.m., a second set of eyes picked up the SUV on I-24 heading east. At 3:18, a third relay took over near Murfreesboro. At 3:24, the SUV exited at a truck stop near Smyrna and parked between 2 18-wheelers where no security cameras could reach. But there were 6 Hells Angels in that truck stop. 2 inside buying coffee they didn't need. 4 outside in the lot, positioned at the corners, like sentries, all of them watching, all of them recording. Nate's phone rang. He listened, nodded, hung up. Rachel Sinclair and her team are mobile. ETA to the Smyrna truck stop, 12 minutes. She's got a warrant pending, based on the plate number and the photo evidence. State police are coordinating a perimeter. 12 minutes, Cole said. What if they move again? Then your guys follow them until Rachel catches up. That's the deal, Cole. We watch. We report. They arrest. And if those 12 minutes cost a kid his life, Nate took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The tiredness in his face went deeper than sleeplessness. It was the weariness of a man who had spent a decade learning that the distance between justice and tragedy is almost always measured in minutes. Then we live with that. Because if we blow this now, if some biker tackles one of these guys in a parking lot and a defense attorney gets the evidence thrown out, then all 14 of those kids disappear into a system that knows how to erase people, and we never find them. Cole hated it. He hated it with every cell in his body. But he knew Nate was right. This was not about justice delivered in a parking lot at 3 in the morning. This was about building something airtight, something no lawyer could unravel, no judge could dismiss, no broken system could lose in a filing cabinet. Tell our guys to hold. Cole said. Walt relayed the message. Then he added his own words, spoken into the phone with the quiet authority of a man who had earned the right to ask other men to do impossible things. Brothers, I know what you're feeling. I'm feeling it too. But tonight we are the wall between these men and those children. And a wall doesn't move. A wall holds. Hold the line. At 3:36 a.m., 4 black sedans and 2 unmarked vans converged on the Smyrna truck stop from 3 directions. Cole was not there. He was in a wooden chair next to a sleeping girl. But Rattler was there, and Rattler watched everything. The FBI moved fast and quiet. Doors open, badges caught the light, weapons drawn and steady. The men in the SUV had nowhere to run. Sandwiched between 2 trucks, surrounded by federal agents, their only choices were compliance or a very short and very final alternative. They chose compliance. Rattler's hands were shaking as he texted the update. 3 in custody. They found the duffel bag, zip ties, prepaid phones, sedatives, and photos, hammer. Photos of kids. A lot of kids. Cole read the message twice. Then he set the phone face down on his knee and stared at the wall. The plaster was cracked in the shape of something that almost looked like a river branching and splitting, finding its way through the weakest points. He thought about Ethan, 9 years old, sharing crackers under a bridge with a girl who didn't have anyone else. He thought about Gracie asleep 2 feet away, trusting a man she had known for 6 hours with her life because she had run out of options and run out of fear and had nothing left but the sound of motorcycles and the hope that loud meant safe. He thought about Savannah, his daughter, somewhere in Oregon with her mother, 11 years old now, growing up without him because a judge had looked at the ink on his arms and the patch on his back and decided that a man who looked like Cole Brannigan was a danger to a child. And Cole Brannigan, who had not cried since the day his father's truck went off the bridge in Clarksville in 1993, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and wept. Quietly, so Gracie wouldn't hear, because the chair didn't move and the promise didn't break. And somewhere in an FBI evidence room, a duffel bag full of zip ties and photographs was about to crack open something much larger and much darker than anyone in that parking lot had imagined. But there was something else in that duffel bag. Something Nate would call Cole about in the morning. Something that would change the shape of everything. A police-issue radio tuned to the Nashville metro frequency, sitting right there among the zip ties and the sedatives and the photographs of children, like a signature, like a confession, like proof that the people who were supposed to protect those kids were the ones holding the door open for the monsters. Gracie shifted in her sleep and mumbled 4 words that Cole would carry for the rest of his life. Sergeant says thank you. Cole pressed his forehead against his hands and breathed. In, out, in, out. The rhythm of a man putting himself back together one breath at a time because a 3-year-old girl needed him whole and he would not let her down. Not tonight, not any night that came after. The chair didn't move. The promise held. The sun came up at 6:42 a.m., and Cole hadn't moved from that chair. His back ached in 3 places. His knees had locked into a position that was going to require several painful seconds to undo. His eyes burned from hours of staring at the same cracked plaster wall without blinking properly. But Gracie was still breathing, slow, steady, safe. And that was worth more than every hour of sleep he had ever lost in 44 years of losing them. Joe came in with 2 mugs set, one on the table near Cole kept the other. Coffee's fresh. Walt wants to talk to you, but I told him it waits until she wakes up on her own. Thanks, Joe. She paused at the doorway. You look like hell. I've looked worse. I know, that's what worries me. She left. Cole picked up the coffee and took a sip. It was strong enough to dissolve a spoon. Exactly the way Joe made everything. No half measures, no compromise, no apology. Gracie stirred at 7:14 a.m. Her eyes opened slowly and Cole watched the exact moment when fear returned. That half-second flash where she didn't know where she was. Didn't know if the world was still dangerous. Didn't know if last night had been real or just another dream that dissolved into cold concrete in empty mornings. Then she saw Cole, and the fear drained out of her face like water through a crack in stone. You stayed, she said. Told you I would. She sat up, looked at Sargent, looked at the blanket, looked around the room with the careful attention of a child who had learned to memorize exits the way other children memorize nursery rhymes. Am I in trouble? Cole's chest tightened. In trouble. Why would you be in trouble? Because I ran away. The lady said I wasn't supposed to run away. She said they'd find me a home, and I wasn't supposed to run. What lady? Gracie, the one with the clipboard. She came after Mama went to sleep and didn't wake up. She said I had to go to a foster home. But the big kids under the bridge said foster homes are bad. They said some of them are worse than the street. Cole set his coffee down and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He looked straight into those gray-blue eyes and spoke with every ounce of steady conviction he could gather from the wreckage of a night that had taken everything out of him. Listen to me, Gracie. You're not in trouble. Not with me. Not with anyone here. You did the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do, and I've known a lot of brave people. You ran when you needed to run, and then you stopped running when you found the right place to stop. That takes guts, kid. Gracie considered this with the same solemn gravity she brought to everything. Sergeant helped. He told me which way to go. Then Sergeant's got good instincts. Bear appeared in the doorway holding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast cut into careful triangles. He set it in front of Gracie with the tenderness of a man handling explosives. Morning, little one. You like eggs? Gracie stared at the plate. That's all for me. Every bite. Nobody else wants some. Bear had to turn away for a moment. When he turned back, his smile was bolted in place. Nope, all yours. Gracie picked up a triangle of toast and ate it in 3 bites. Then another. Then she held a piece of egg near Sergeant's stitched mouth. Sergeant says it's good, she announced. Cole watched her eat and felt the clock ticking inside his chest. He knew what was coming. Walt knew. Joe knew. Every person in this building knew that the moment the outside world discovered Gracie Dawson, the machinery would begin. The forms, the caseworkers, the custody protocols, the system that had already failed this child once and was about to get a second opportunity to fail her again. He pushed himself up from the chair, every joint protesting, and walked into the main room. Walt was at the bar with Nate Pritchard and a woman Cole had never seen before. She was mid-40s, dark hair pulled back tight, wearing a navy blazer that said federal government before she even opened her mouth. Her badge hung from a lanyard around her neck. FBI, Cole Brannigan, Walt said. This is Special Agent Rachel Sinclair. Rachel extended her hand. Cole shook it. Her grip was firm, no nonsense, the handshake of a woman who had learned early that softness was interpreted as weakness in the rooms where she worked. Mr. Brannigan, I want to start by saying that what your organization did last night was extraordinary. The surveillance, the documentation, the discipline. My team made 3 arrests based almost entirely on evidence your members collected. We didn't do it for a thank you, I understand that. But I also need to ask you some questions about the child. Her name is Gracie. About Gracie, I understand she's been living on the streets for approximately 12 days. Is that correct? That's what she told me. And she mentioned a boy named Ethan who was taken from the I-40 encampment. Yeah, 9 years old, shared his crackers with her. Told her to run when he saw the black SUV coming. Rachel opened a folder she'd been holding against her chest. Inside were photographs, surveillance shots, traffic camera captures. Grainy but clear enough to tell a story that nobody in the room wanted to hear. Mr. Brannigan, the 3 men we arrested last night are not independent operators. Based on the phones we recovered, we've identified connections to a network operating across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama. At least 23 children have been flagged as potential victims over the past 18 months. 23. Cole's voice dropped to the register that made men who knew him take a step back. You said 14 yesterday? Yesterday we had traffic cameras. Today we have their phones. The number went up. Nate took off his glasses and set them on the bar. Cole, this is the biggest break Rachel's task force has had in 3 years. Those prepaid phones had contact lists, GPS history text messages. Some of it's encrypted, but the Bureau's tech team is already pulling it apart. And Ethan Cole said, Rachel hesitated. The hesitation lasted less than a second, but Cole had spent 2 tours reading faces under pressure, and that fraction of silence told him everything. We don't have him yet, but we have a lead. One of the phones shows a route to a property in rural Kentucky near the Tennessee border. We're coordinating with Kentucky State Police to execute a search warrant this afternoon. This afternoon, that boy has been missing for over a week, every hour that passes. Mr. Brannigan? Rachel's voice was measured, but there was something beneath the professional surface, something that sounded like it was being held underwater by force of will. I understand the urgency better than you think. I've been doing this for 11 years. I know exactly what happens with every hour that passes. But if we move too fast and the warrant gets challenged, we lose access to that property and everyone connected to it vanishes. Cole gripped the edge of the bar. The wood groaned. He wanted to ride to Kentucky right now with 50 brothers and kick down every door between Nashville and the border until he found a 9-year-old boy who liked crackers. But Nate was right last night, and Rachel was right this morning. Rage doesn't save children. Patience does. Evidence does. The slow, grinding, agonizing machinery of the law does even when every second it grinds feels like a betrayal of every child it was built to protect. Fine, Cole said through his teeth. But I want updates. Every hour. That's not a request. That's a condition. Rachel studied him. Nate told me you were difficult. Nate was being generous. Agreed. Every hour. You have my word. Then Cole said something that changed the temperature in the room. There's something else, that duffel bag your team recovered. Was there a police radio in it? Rachel's expression went carefully neutral. Where did you hear about that Rattlers team saw everything that came out of that bag? Zip ties, phones, sedatives, photos, and a radio tuned to the Nashville Metro PD frequency. I didn't bring it up at 3 in the morning because I wanted to see if you would. Rachel glanced at Nate. Nate looked at the ceiling. Mr. Brannigan, don't manage me, Agent Sinclair. There's a cop in this. Somebody on the force was feeding them information, which means that somebody in a uniform knew children were being taken and didn't just look the other way. They held the door open. Rachel set the folder on the bar and folded her arms. We're aware of the radio. We're investigating internally. I can't share details of that investigation with civilians. Civilians. Cole let the words sit in the air between them. 600 of my civilians were out there last night doing your job while your people were asleep. Rachel didn't flinch, but something moved behind her eyes. Respect or recognition, or the uncomfortable awareness that the man standing in front of her in a leather vest and faded denim had just identified the one thread in her investigation that kept her awake at night. I'm going to ask you to trust me, she said. I don't trust easy. I know. Trust me anyway. Cole held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. But I want Gracie protected. If there's a cop involved, then whoever's running this network knows about her. They know she talked, and they know where she is. Rachel picked up the folder. I'll have 2 agents posted outside this building within the hour. Plain clothes, unmarked vehicle. Not enough. What do you suggest? Cole looked at Walt. Walt looked at Cole. The same unspoken language, the same 4 decades of trust. We'll handle our own security, Cole said. Your agents can watch the street. My brothers will watch everything else. Rachel opened her mouth, closed it, and then did something Cole had not expected. She almost smiled. I'm beginning to understand why Nate calls you a headache. Nate calls me worse than that. I know. He does. The door to the back room opened and Joe walked out holding Gracie's hand. Gracie had been cleaned up, face washed, hair brushed into something approaching order. She was wearing a child's t-shirt that Joe had conjured from somewhere, probably from the overnight bag one of her grandkids had left in the office months ago. Gracie saw Cole and walked straight to him. She stopped at his leg and leaned against it with her full weight, the way a child leans against the one thing in the world she's decided to believe in. Rachel Sinclair looked at this. The federal mask slipped for just a moment. Underneath was a woman who probably went home to children of her own and who understood with the clarity that only a parent can have exactly what she was seeing. Hi, Gracie. Rachel knelt down. My name is Rachel. I'm here to help catch the bad men. Gracie looked up at Cole. Is she okay? Cole put his hand on the top of Gracie's head. Yeah, darling, she's okay. They talked for a few minutes. Gracie described Ethan. Brown hair, brown eyes, missing a tooth right in front. He said the tooth fairy doesn't come when you live outside. She described the wolf tattoo again. She told Rachel that one of the men, the one without the wolf, had offered candy from the car. Ethan told me to stay away. Ethan said that's what they always say. The room was silent, every adult in it processing the same awful truth. A 9-year-old homeless boy understood predators better than most adults because the streets had given him an education that no child should ever receive. She's done, Cole said. That's enough for now. Rachel stood and nodded. That's enough. But then Gracie said something else. Something that made Rachel Sinclair reach for her notebook with hands that were not entirely steady. The policeman waved the car through. Everyone stopped. What policeman, Gracie? The one at the bridge. When the black car came the third time, there was a policeman standing near the road. He saw the car and he waved it through. He waved like this. Gracie demonstrated a casual forward wave, the kind a traffic cop gives. Like he knew them. Rachel crouched back down. Gracie, this is very important. Can you tell me what the policeman looked like? He was tall. He had a brown jacket. Not a blue one like the other policeman. A brown one, and he had a star right here. Gracie pointed to her chest, left side. A detective's badge. Brown jacket. Not patrol, a detective. Rachel looked at Cole. Cole looked at Rachel. The same conclusion arriving at the same moment from opposite sides of the room. Did he see you, Gracie, Cole asked, and his voice had gone very quiet. Gracie thought about it. I was behind the wall, the big concrete wall near the camp. I was watching through a crack. He didn't see me, but I saw him. Okay, darling, you did good. You did real good. Rachel stood up and her face had rearranged itself into something hard and focused. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the hallway. Cole could hear fragments of her conversation. The words detective and internal affairs and I need a photo lineup prepared drifted through the doorway like smoke. Cole knelt next to Gracie. Sergeant needs a nap, he said. How about we tuck him in? He walked Gracie back to the couch and she curled up with Sergeant in the blankets and was asleep again within minutes. The exhaustion of a child who had been running for so long that rest itself had become a foreign language she was only beginning to relearn. When Cole came back to the main room, Rachel was waiting. We need to move fast, she said. If the detective she described finds out we have a witness who can identify him, this gets dangerous. It's already dangerous. More dangerous. For her specifically. Cole's jaw set. Then let's make sure he doesn't find out. 2 hours later, a white sedan pulled into the parking lot of Ironside Bar. A woman in a gray pantsuit stepped out carrying a clipboard and a folder thick enough to choke on. The seal on the folder read, Tennessee Department of Children's Services. Joe saw her first. Walt, we've got company. Walt looked out the front window. That was fast. Somebody at Nashville Metro must have filed a report when Rachel's team mentioned a minor witness, Nate said. Can you stop it? Cole asked. Cole, I can't stop CPS. Nobody can stop CPS. They have legal authority over unaccompanied minors, and there's not a judge in this state who's going to override that on the word of a biker bar. Cole turned to Walt. She's not ready. She just stopped shaking. She just had her first hot meal in 2 weeks. If they take her now and put her in some emergency foster placement with strangers, she'll run again. That's what she does. She runs. And next time there might not be a parking lot full of people who give a damn. The CPS worker walked through the door. She was mid-50s, tired eyes, sensible shoes, the look of a woman who had been doing an impossible job for too many years, with too few resources and too little recognition. Her name tag read Helen Garrett. I'm looking for an unaccompanied minor reported at this location. Helen said, scanning the room and clearly recalibrating every assumption she'd walked in with. Walt stepped forward. I'm Robert Mercer. I'm the one who contacted law enforcement last night regarding the child. She's here. She's safe. She's been fed, washed, and she slept through the night for the first time in 12 days. Helen looked at Walt, the leather vest, the patches, the gray beard, the hands that looked like they'd been forged in a foundry. To her credit, she didn't flinch. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate what you've done, but I'm required by law to take custody of this child and place her in an appropriate, ma'am. Cole's voice cut through the room. He stepped forward, and even Helen, who had almost certainly faced down hostile parents and furious relatives hundreds of times in her career, took a small, involuntary step backward. I need you to hear something before you finish that sentence. Sir, I understand emotions are running high. No, you don't understand. Because you weren't here at midnight when a 3-year-old girl walked barefoot across a parking lot and asked a stranger for a place to sleep. You weren't here when she told us men in a black truck were hunting her. You weren't here when the FBI arrested 3 child traffickers because this little girl was brave enough to open her mouth. So before you walk into this room with your clipboard and your protocols and your appropriate placement, I need you to understand who you're talking about. Helen held his gaze. She didn't back down. And Cole, despite himself, respected that. Mr. Brannigan, yes, I know who you are. The police report had your name. I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to protect this child. Same as you. Then don't take her somewhere she'll run from. I'm legally required. Then change the law. Cole. Walt's hand landed on his shoulder, heavy, grounding. Let her talk. Helen took a breath. There's something you need to know. We've located a relative, a woman in Bowling Green, Kentucky, Lorraine Finch. She's listed as the maternal grandmother in our records. The air left the room. Grandmother Cole stared at Helen. Gracie's mother had a mother, yes, and she's expressed interest in taking custody. Cole felt cold move through him. Not the cold of fear, the cold of something wrong. Something that didn't fit. Where was this grandmother when Megan Dawson was dying in a $50 a week apartment? Where was she when Gracie was sleeping under a bridge for 12 nights? Helen's expression softened by exactly 1 degree. I don't have those answers yet. But under Tennessee law, biological relatives have priority in custody placement. Mrs. Finch has contacted our office and requested immediate custody. Requested, Cole repeated, like she's filling out a form, like she's ordering something. That's not fair, Mr. Brannigan. None of this is fair, Miss Garrett. That's exactly my point. Gracie appeared in the hallway. She had heard the loud voices. Of course she had. She had spent 2 weeks learning to hear danger before it arrived, developing an ear for the particular frequency of adults arguing about things that would determine whether she ate or starved, whether she was safe or hunted, whether she existed or didn't. She stood there holding Sergeant, watching the adults with those enormous gray-blue eyes that cataloged everything and forgave nothing. Gracie, Helen said, stepping toward her with practiced warmth. Hi, sweetie. My name is Helen. Gracie took a step back and pressed herself against Cole's leg. I don't want to go. Helen stopped. She looked at Cole, looked at Gracie, looked at the way the child's fingers gripped the denim of his jeans like it was the only fixed point in a world that kept dissolving. Gracie, honey, nobody's going to make you do anything right now. I just want to talk. That's what the last lady said. Then she tried to put me in a car. Helen closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had rearranged beneath the professional surface. She turned to Walt. Mr. Mercer is there somewhere private where I can speak with Gracie. Somewhere she feels comfortable. The back room, where she slept. She likes it there. Can Mr. Brannigan be present? I'm not leaving her. Cole's voice left no space for negotiation. Helen nodded. That's fine. That's actually what I was going to suggest. They walked to the back room. Helen, Gracie, Cole. Gracie sat on the couch and pulled Sergeant into her lap. Cole took his chair. Helen pulled up a second chair and sat across from Gracie, clipboard on her knees, pen untouched. Gracie, can you tell me about your mama? Mama went to sleep and didn't wake up. I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry about that. Did your mama ever talk about her mama, your grandma? Gracie shook her head. Mama said we don't have family. She said it's just us. Did she ever mention someone named Lorraine? Gracie thought, squeezing Sergeant's paw. One time, Mama was crying on the phone. She said, don't call me again, Lorraine. Then she threw the phone at the wall. Cole looked at Helen. Helen looked at Cole. The same unspoken question hanging between them. What happened between Megan Dawson and her mother that was catastrophic enough to erase the word family from a young mother's vocabulary? Miss Garrett, Cole said quietly. I'll work with you. I'll follow the process. But I'm asking you, person to person, not biker to bureaucrat, do not send this child to someone who made her mother cry. Helen tapped her pen against the clipboard. Once, twice, 3 times. A habit of consideration, a physical metronome for the kind of thinking that doesn't happen in straight lines. Mr. Brannigan, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I've placed over 400 children. Some of those placements were the right call. Some of them keep me up at night. I hear what you're saying, and I'm telling you off the record, which I will deny if you ever repeat it. I hear you. Cole nodded slowly. But I need time, Helen continued. The law requires me to investigate the relative placement. I can petition the court for a temporary arrangement while that investigation is completed. Gracie can remain here under supervised. She stays with me. Helen paused. You understand what you're asking for. I'm asking for exactly what she needs. Someone who showed up. Someone who stayed. Helen looked at Gracie. Gracie was watching Cole with an expression that no court document could capture and no legal framework could quantify. The expression of a child who had decided in the absolute and unshakable way that only children can decide that this person was hers. I'll make the calls, Helen said. She stood, walked to the door, stopped, and turned around one last time. Mr. Brannigan, for what it's worth, in 22 years, I've never seen a child bond with someone this fast. Either you're the best thing that ever happened to her, or this is going to break both of you. Wouldn't be the first time something did both. Helen left. Cole sat in the silence and listened to Gracie hum a tuneless melody, to Sergeant a song without words or structure. The kind of sound a child makes when she's testing whether the silence is safe enough to fill. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out. Rachel Sinclair, one line. Warrant executed in Kentucky. Property searched. We found Ethan. He's alive. Cole read it twice. 3 times. Then he looked at Gracie. Hey, darling. Yes, Sergeant's friend, Ethan, the one with the missing tooth. Gracie's eyes went wide. Her hands tightened on Sergeant until the bear's remaining eye seemed to bulge. Is he okay? Yeah, Gracie, he's okay. They found him. Gracie pressed Sergeant against her face and squeezed her eyes shut. And for the first time since Cole had met her in the parking lot through the long night, in the longer morning through the soup and the blankets and the questions from strangers with clipboards and badges, Gracie Dawson cried. Not from fear, not from pain. Not from the accumulated weight of 12 days of surviving on instinct and crackers and the blind hope that loud places might be safe places. She cried from relief, the kind of relief that only arrives when you've been holding something so tightly and for so long that your hands have forgotten how to open. Cole sat in the wooden chair and let her cry. He didn't say a word because some tears don't need comfort. Some tears just need someone to see them fall. His phone buzzed again. Rachel Sinclair, second message. It's worse than we thought. Ethan isn't the only one. We found 6 children in that house and evidence of dozens more. The detective is Wade Holt, Nashville Metro. We're building the case now. Do not approach him. Cole stared at the screen until the words blurred. Wade Holt, a detective, a man with a badge and a sworn oath and the authority to walk past every barrier that existed between predators and children. And he had been walking them right through. Gracie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him. Cole, why are you making that face? He put the phone away. Just thinking. Darling, about what? About how much work we've still got to do. 3 days passed. They were the longest 3 days of Cole Brannigan's life, and he had lived through some long ones. He had lived through a 52-hour firefight in Ramadi, where the only thing between him and the next world was a cinder block wall, and a private from Iowa who couldn't stop praying long enough to reload. He had lived through the 18-hour ride from Portland back to Nashville to the custody hearing for Savannah, when the highway had gone blurry, not from rain, but from the kind of crying a man only does when he's alone at 70 miles an hour and nobody can hear. But these 3 days were different because these 3 days had a deadline. Thursday, 10 a.m., Davidson County Juvenile Court. Helen Garrett had petitioned for a temporary custody arrangement that would allow Gracie to remain under Cole's supervision while the investigation into Lorraine Finch was completed. But the law doesn't care about wooden chairs and promises. The law cares about paperwork and precedent and blood relation. You need a lawyer, Walt said on Tuesday morning, sitting across from Cole at the bar while Gracie was in the main area with Joe learning to count using sugar packets. I can't afford a lawyer. The chapter can. Cole shook his head. That's club money, Walt. That's for bail bonds and legal defense when one of the brothers gets jammed up. Not for this. Not for what? Not for protecting a 3-year-old kid. Walt leaned forward. Hammer, I've been president of this chapter for 14 years. I've spent club money on things dumber than you can imagine. This isn't dumb. This is the most important thing we've ever done. So shut up and let me help you. Cole, shut up. Walt dialed. Yeah, it's Mercer. I need Sharon. Tell her it's urgent. He waited. Sharon, it's Walt. I need a favor. No bigger than that. I need a miracle. Family court Thursday, a custody case involving a 3-year-old girl and one of my brothers. Can you do it? He listened. Yeah, I know what day it is. I'm asking anyway. He hung up. Vivian Cross, family law. She's the best in Nashville. She owes me from when we recovered her stolen Mustang back in 2019. A biker gang's lawyer, Cole muttered. Vivian's not a biker's lawyer. She's a Stanford-educated pit bull in heels who hasn't lost a case in 2 years. The judge won't know about the Mustang. Wednesday afternoon, Vivian Cross arrived at Ironside in a black Mercedes wearing a suit that cost more than Cole's motorcycle. She was 52, red-haired, sharp-eyed, and the first thing she said when she walked through the door was, "Where's the child? I need to see her before I can build a strategy." Gracie was sitting on Bear's lap at the bar, drawing pictures with crayons Joe had bought at the dollar store. When Vivian approached, Gracie looked up and assessed her with those gray-blue eyes. "Are you a clipboard lady?" Vivian blinked. "No, sweetheart. I'm a fighting lady." Gracie considered this. "I like fighting ladies." Vivian turned to Cole with an expression he couldn't read. "She's sharp. She survived 12 days alone on the streets of Nashville." "Yeah, she's sharp." They sat in the back room. Cole, Vivian, Walt. Vivian opened a leather binder and pulled out papers. "Here's what we're facing. Lorraine Finch, 61, Bowling Green, Kentucky, retired postal worker. No criminal record, clean credit, owns her home. On paper, she's exactly what a judge wants to see for a relative placement." "On paper," Cole repeated. "On paper. But paper doesn't tell me why her daughter cut her off. Paper doesn't tell me why Megan Dawson told a 3-year-old that they had no family. And paper definitely doesn't tell me why Lorraine Finch waited until CPS contacted her to express interest in a granddaughter she's never met. You think she's after something? I think there's a story we haven't found yet, and I need to find it before Thursday." Vivian looked at Walt. "Can your people dig up anything about Lorraine Finch that isn't in a public record?" Walt raised an eyebrow. "You asking me to investigate a civilian, I'm asking you to protect a child." Walt pulled out his phone. "Ray Torres, his chapter's in Memphis, but he's got contacts all through Kentucky. Give me 24 hours. Vivian stood. "Get me something, Walt. Because right now the law is on Lorraine's side and the only weapon I have is the truth." She left. Walt left. Cole sat alone in the back room and stared at the wall where Gracie's crayon drawings were taped up. Stick figures in a row, dozens of them, all wearing what appeared to be triangular shapes on their bodies. Vests. Biker vests. And at the top, in wobbly crayon letters that Joe had helped her spell 2 words. My family. His phone rang at 8 p.m. "Ray Torres. Hammer, I found something. You're not going to like it. Tell me." Lorraine Finch filed a life insurance claim on Megan Dawson 2 days after the overdose. Policy was taken out 4 years ago before Gracie was born. Lorraine is the sole beneficiary. Payout is $250,000. Cole's blood went cold. The kind of cold that doesn't start in the skin, the kind that starts in the center of the chest and radiates outward until everything it touches turns to ice. She took out a life insurance policy on her own daughter. Gets worse. I talked to a neighbor in Bowling Green, old woman named Thelma Bancroft. Been living next door to Lorraine for 30 years. She says Lorraine and Megan had a falling out when Megan was 17. Megan got pregnant. Lorraine kicked her out, told her she was trash, told her she'd end up dead in a ditch, told her never to come back, and then took out a life insurance policy on her. Cole's grip on the phone could have cracked the screen. That's how Thelma tells it. She said Lorraine used to say things like, "That girl's going to kill herself one day. Might as well get something out of it." Thelma thought she was joking. She doesn't think that anymore. A mother who told her own daughter she would end up dead, who kicked her out pregnant at 17, who took out a policy and waited. And now that the payout was processing, now that Megan was in the ground and the money was in the pipeline, suddenly Lorraine Finch wanted custody of the granddaughter she had never held. "Ray, is there any chance she actually cares about Gracie?" Ray was quiet for a long moment. Hammer. "I don't know the woman's heart, but I know the math. $250,000 from the insurance plus a foster care subsidy from the state of Kentucky if she takes custody of a minor relative. That's another $800 a month. Do the math yourself. Cole did the math. He hated the answer. One more thing, Ray said. Thelma mentioned that Lorraine has a boyfriend, guy named Dwayne Kessler. Moved in about 2 years ago. Thelma says he makes her uncomfortable. She couldn't explain why, exactly. Just said there's something wrong with him. Wrong how? She said he watches the neighborhood kids. Not in a normal way. She said she stopped letting her grandchildren play in the front yard after he moved in. Cole's fist tightened until his knuckles went white. Ray, I need you to run Dwayne Kessler through everything you've got. Everything, already on it. I'll call you back. Cole hung up and sat in silence for 5 full minutes. Then he called Vivian Cross. Vivian, we need to talk tonight. Vivian arrived at Ironside at 9:30 p.m. Cole laid it all out. The insurance policy, the estrangement, Thelma Bancroft's statement, Dwayne Kessler. Vivian's face went through a controlled transformation as she listened. By the time he finished, her pen was pressing so hard against her notepad that it tore clean through the paper. This changes everything, she said. A judge will not hand a child to a relative who profited from the mother's death. And if Dwayne Kessler has any kind of record, Ray's checking, good. Because if there's anything in his history, anything at all, we don't just block the placement. We bury it. At 11 p.m., Ray Torres called back. His voice was flat, the voice of a man who had found something that made him want to put his fist through drywall. Dwayne Kessler, age 58, 2 prior addresses in Alabama before moving to Kentucky, no criminal record in Kentucky, but in Alabama. Ray paused. 2014 charged with indecent exposure near a playground in Mobile. Charges dropped for insufficient evidence. 2016 investigated by Alabama Department of Human Services for inappropriate contact with a minor. Case closed, no prosecution. 2017 moved to Kentucky. Cole didn't speak for a long time. Hammer, you there? I'm here. There's a pattern. You see it, I see it. This man is living in the house where they want to send Gracie. Not anymore, he's not. Cole hung up and called Vivian. She answered on the first ring like she'd been holding the phone in her hand waiting. Dwayne Kessler has a history, not convictions, investigations. 2 in Alabama, both involving minors. He moved to Kentucky to start clean. Vivian's voice was ice. Forward everything to me. Names, dates, case numbers. I'll have a motion filed before the courthouse opens tomorrow morning. Cole, this is the ammunition we needed. No judge in this country will place a child in a home with an investigated sex offender. Investigated, not convicted. Doesn't matter. In family court, the standard isn't beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the best interest of the child. And no reasonable person on earth could argue that placing a 3-year-old girl in a house with Dwayne Kessler is in her best interest. Cole felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but the first crack of daylight after the longest night of his life. He walked back to the back room. Gracie was asleep on the couch. Sergeant tucked under her chin, the blankets pulled up to her shoulders by Joe, who checked on her every 30 minutes like clockwork. Cole sat down in the wooden chair. He looked at the crayon drawings on the wall, the stick figures in their biker vests, the 2 words at the top, my family. He closed his eyes and let himself imagine for just a moment that Thursday would go the way it needed to go, that the law, for once in its grinding, indifferent history, would look at a little girl and a broken man and see what everyone in this bar had seen from the first moment she walked out of the dark, that they belonged to each other. He opened his eyes. Gracie was breathing. The chair was solid beneath him. And somewhere in Bowling Green, Kentucky, a woman who had bet on her own daughter's death was about to learn that the world had finally stopped looking the other way. Thursday morning, 10 a.m., Davidson County Juvenile Court. Cole wore the only button-down shirt he owned. It was black because every shirt he owned was black, and the top button strained against a neck that had never been designed for formal wear. Walt had made him take off the leather vest before they left Ironside, which felt like removing a limb, like walking into battle without armor. Bear waited outside in the truck with Gracie, who was not required to be in the courtroom, but had refused with a stubbornness that would have impressed any drill sergeant in the United States Marine Corps to be more than 100 yards from Cole. She sat in the back seat with Sergeant on her lap. watching the courthouse doors with the focused patience of a child who had learned that the most important things in life happen behind doors that nobody invites you through. Vivian Cross stood at the petitioner's table looking like a woman who had come to dismantle something and had brought the right tools. Her red hair was pulled back. Her suit was pressed. Her binder was thick with the kind of evidence that ends arguments. Across the aisle, Lorraine Finch sat with a court-appointed attorney. She was a thin woman with carefully styled gray hair and a lavender dress that looked new, purchased for the occasion, selected to project an image of grandmotherly warmth that could be read from the back row of a courtroom. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her face wore an expression of practiced grief. Sad eyes, tight mouth. The look of a woman who wanted the judge to see a heartbroken grandmother reaching for the last piece of her daughter. Cole looked at her and felt nothing but cold. The judge was the Honorable Catherine Hargrove, mid-60s, small in stature but large in presence, the kind of woman who filled a room not by taking up space but by commanding it. She was known in Davidson County for two things. She loved children and she hated liars. Those two qualities had ended more custody bids than any statute on the books. This is a hearing to determine temporary custody of the minor child, Gracie Dawson, age 3. Judge Hargrove began, her voice carrying the precise weight of a woman who had spoken these words 1,000 times and never once considered them routine. I have before me a petition from the Department of Children's Services for placement with the maternal grandmother Lorraine Finch, and a counter petition from Mr. Cole Brannigan for temporary guardianship. Mrs. Cross, you may proceed. Vivian stood. Your Honor, I'd like to start with a simple question. Why is Lorraine Finch here today? Lorraine's attorney stood. Objection, relevance. I'll allow it, Judge Hargrove said. Answer the question, Mrs. Finch. Lorraine cleared her throat. The sound was small and careful, rehearsed. I'm here because Gracie is my granddaughter. She's all I have left of my Megan. I want to give her a home. Vivian nodded slowly. A home, that's generous. Tell me, Mrs. Finch, when did you last see your daughter Megan? Lorraine's composure flickered. Just barely. A tremor at the corner of her mouth. It's been some years. Some years. Can you be more specific? I don't remember the exact. Let me help. According to hospital records, the last documented contact between you and Megan Dawson was when Megan was 17 years old and pregnant. That was approximately 4 years ago. Is that accurate? Lorraine's attorney leaned in and whispered. Lorraine nodded. Approximately. Yes. And in those 4 years, did you ever visit Megan? No. Did you ever call her? She changed her number. Did you ever send a letter? She wouldn't have read it. Did you ever attempt to meet your granddaughter? I didn't know where they were. Vivian opened her binder. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A, a life insurance policy taken out by Lorraine Finch on Megan Dawson in 2022, 1 year before Gracie was born. The policy is valued at $250,000. Lorraine Finch is the sole beneficiary. The courtroom shifted. The energy changed the way air changes before a storm, that sudden drop in pressure that every living thing can feel in its bones. Judge Hargrove took the document and studied it, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, her expression revealing nothing. Lorraine's attorney was already on his feet. Your Honor, a life insurance policy is not evidence of. Sit down, mister. Hartley, Judge Hargrove said without looking up. Mrs. Cross, continue. Your Honor, I'd also like to submit Exhibit B, a sworn statement from Lorraine Finch's neighbor of 30 years, Thelma Bancroft, describing Mrs. Finch's statements regarding her daughter. I'll reference directly. Mrs. Bancroft states that Lorraine told her, and I quote, that Megan would end up killing herself and that she might as well benefit from it. Lorraine's face went white. The lavender dress suddenly looked like a costume, a disguise that had been ripped away to reveal the shape of something underneath that didn't match the packaging. That's not. Thelma doesn't know what she... Mrs. Finch, Judge Hargrove's voice was a blade wrapped in velvet. You will have your opportunity to respond, Mrs. Cross. Finally, Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit C, records from the state of Alabama regarding Dwayne Kessler, Mrs. Finch's live-in partner. Mr. Kessler was investigated twice for offenses involving minors. 2014, indecent exposure near a playground in Mobile. 2016, investigated for inappropriate contact with a minor. We are asking this court to consider whether placing a 3-year-old girl in a household with Mr. Kessler is consistent with her safety and welfare. The silence that followed had weight. It had mass and gravity, and it pressed down on every person in the room like a physical force. Lorraine Finch gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles turned the same white as her face. Her attorney was turning pages with the frantic energy of a man who had just realized the floor beneath him was not solid. But Lorraine's attorney was not finished. He gathered himself, straightened his tie, and stood. Your Honor, if I may, the petitioner's own candidate for guardianship, Mr. Brannigan, has a relevant history that this court should consider. Mr. Brannigan was denied custody of his own biological daughter, Savannah Brannigan, 7 years ago in a Portland, Oregon family court. The court found that his lifestyle, specifically his membership in an outlaw motorcycle organization, was incompatible with the welfare of a minor child. If Mr. Brannigan was deemed unfit for his own daughter, how can this court consider him fit for someone else's? The words hit Cole like a fist to the sternum, not because they were untrue, they were true. Every word. But because hearing them spoken aloud in a courtroom, hearing the worst moment of his life, summarized in 3 sentences by a stranger in a suit, stripped away every wall he'd built and left him standing in the open. Vivian didn't flinch. She had known this was coming. She had prepared for it the way a soldier prepares for an ambush, by choosing the ground. Your Honor, I'd like to address that directly. Mr. Brannigan lost custody of his daughter in 2019. The court's finding was based entirely on lifestyle considerations, specifically his motorcycle club membership. There were no findings of abuse, no findings of neglect, no findings of substance use, no criminal convictions beyond a dismissed bar fight and a disorderly conduct fine. The Portland court made a judgment about the kind of man Mr. Brannigan appeared to be, not the kind of father he was. She paused and let that distinction fill the room. Since then, Mr. Brannigan has maintained stable employment. He has a clean apartment with a bedroom prepared specifically for Gracie. He has a support network that includes over 600 members of his organization who mobilized in a single night to protect a child they had never met. He has the recommendation of FBI Special Agent Rachel Sinclair, who has stated on record that Mr. Brannigan's actions directly led to the rescue of 23 children from a trafficking network. Vivian set a letter on the judge's bench. And most importantly, Your Honor, he has the trust of the child herself. Gracie Dawson, after 12 days alone on the streets, chose to walk toward Mr. Brannigan. She has been in his care for 4 days. She has gained weight. She sleeps through the night. She calls his bar her home and his friends her family. She drew a picture of them. I have it here if the court would like to see it. Judge Hargrove looked at the crayon drawing, the stick figures in their triangular vests, the wobbly letters at the top. My family. She looked at it for a long time. Mrs. Finch. Judge Hargrove said, and her voice had dropped to a register that made the walls of the courtroom feel closer. Were you aware of Mr. Kessler's history in Alabama? Lorraine's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He told me those were misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. Judge Hargrove set the papers down. The sound was small, but it carried. Mr. Hartley, does your client have anything to add? Lorraine's attorney looked like a man standing in quicksand who had just felt it reach his waist. Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to review the denied. I've heard enough. Judge Hargrove folded her hands. She looked at Lorraine Finch. She looked at Cole Brannigan. She looked at the crayon drawing one more time. There was a sound at the back of the courtroom. The heavy wooden door creaking open on hinges that had announced 1,000 entrances, each one carrying the weight of someone's future. Then footsteps, small footsteps, fast and certain, the rhythm of a child who had learned to walk with purpose because purposeless walking was a luxury she had never been able to afford. Gracie Dawson walked through the door of the courtroom, holding Sergeant in one arm and Bear's massive hand in the other. She wore a yellow dress that Joe had bought her 3 days ago, the first new piece of clothing she had owned since her mother died, and her blonde hair was brushed and catching the courtroom light. Bear's face was a masterwork of conflicting emotions, panic that he had failed his one assignment, apology directed at Cole through exaggerated mouth movements, and underneath both something that looked unmistakably like pride. Because this tiny person had slipped out of a truck cab, navigated a courthouse lobby, found the correct courtroom, and walked through the doors with the confidence of a lawyer arriving for opening arguments. Gracie released Bear's hand, walked down the center aisle of the courtroom with the same fearless, deliberate purpose that had carried her across a parking lot at midnight, past the rows of wooden benches, past the attorneys and the bailiff and the court reporter, and stopped directly in front of the judge's bench. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the polished floor. Sargent's one remaining eye caught the overhead light. Every adult in the room held their breath. Judge Hargrove looked down at the 3-year-old girl standing before her. Gracie looked up at the judge. Those gray-blue eyes, enormous, steady, older than any 3-year-old's eyes should ever be. Well, Judge Hargrove said, and something in her voice had changed. Something that sounded almost human. Who are you, young lady? I'm Gracie. This is Sargent. He's a bear. I can see that. Gracie, do you know where you are? A room where people decide things. That's exactly right. Do you want to tell me something? Gracie looked back at Cole. He sat in his chair, motionless, not daring to breathe, not daring to interfere with whatever was about to happen. She looked at Lorraine, studied her for a moment with the same careful assessment she brought to everything, and then turned back to the judge. He stayed in the chair. He promised he would stay, and he stayed. Every night, he didn't leave, he didn't lie. Sargent says that's what matters. Judge Hargrove removed her glasses. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. When she put the glasses back on, her eyes were bright. Thank you, Gracie. I think Sargent is very wise. He is. He's the wisest bear I know. Please go sit with Mr. Brannigan now. Gracie walked back to Cole. She climbed into the chair next to him, settled Sargent on her lap, and folded her hands exactly the way she had seen the adults do it. Cole put his arm around her. He couldn't help it. He knew it wasn't protocol. He didn't care. Judge Hargrove spoke. It is the finding of this court that placement with Lorraine Finch presents an unacceptable risk to the minor child. The petition for relative placement is denied. Temporary guardianship is granted to Cole Brannigan, subject to a full home study background check and regular supervision by the Department of Children's Services. This arrangement will be reviewed in 90 days. She paused. And Mr. Brannigan, the court notes for the record that it has rarely seen a child's trust more clearly earned. Don't waste it. Cole's vision blurred. He blinked hard and gripped the edge of the table. Vivian put her hand on his arm. Breathe, Cole. 90 days, he whispered. 90 days to prove you're exactly who that little girl already knows you are. Cole stood. His legs were unsteady beneath him. He turned toward the door because Bear was waiting and the truck was waiting and the road was waiting, and every minute he spent in this courtroom was a minute he wasn't spending being the person he had promised Gracie he would be. But Lorraine Finch stepped into the aisle and blocked his path. She was crying. Real tears or performance. Cole couldn't tell and realized he didn't care enough to try. Mr. Brannigan, you don't know what happened between me and Megan. You don't know the whole story. I know enough. I made mistakes. Every mother makes mistakes. Not every mother bets on her daughter dying. Lorraine flinched as if he'd struck her across the face. I loved Megan. Then you should have shown up. Any day. Any year. You should have shown up. But you didn't. And the only person who showed up for your granddaughter was a man covered in tattoos in a parking lot at midnight. Think about that on your drive home, Mrs. Finch. Think about what that says. He stepped past her, walked out of the courthouse, down the steps, across the parking lot where the autumn sun was bright and the air smelled like cut grass and exhaust and something that might have been the first morning of a new life. He opened the door of Bear's truck. Gracie was already climbing back into the back seat, arranging Sargent on the cushion beside her. She looked at Cole's face and read it instantly. Because 3-year-olds who survived the streets learn to read faces the way other children learn to read picture books. Fluently, instinctively, as a matter of survival. I'm staying, you're staying, darling. Gracie didn't cheer, didn't clap, didn't squeal. She held Sargent up to Cole's face and pressed the bear's stitched mouth against his cheek. Sargent says he knew. Cole pressed his forehead against the stuffed bear's worn head and held it there for 3 seconds. That was all he allowed himself. 3 seconds of falling apart before he gathered the pieces and put them back in order. Bear was gripping the steering wheel with both hands, staring through the windshield, tears rolling down his cheeks and disappearing into his beard. Take us home, Bear. Where's home, Hammer? Cole looked at Gracie. Gracie looked at Cole. Ironside, Cole said. For now, Ironside is home. Bear started the truck. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Gracie pressed her face against the window and watched Lorraine Finch standing alone on the courthouse steps, clutching her purse, growing smaller and smaller until she was just a shape, and then just a color, and then nothing at all. Gracie turned around. hugged Sargent, and said quietly, "She smelled like Mama's sad days." Cole closed his eyes. Some sentences don't need a response. Some sentences just need a man sitting in the next seat keeping his promise, letting a 3-year-old carry the weight of the world in words she shouldn't have to know. The truck turned onto the highway. Nashville stretched out ahead of them, and somewhere in a federal building downtown, Rachel Sinclair was pinning photographs to a corkboard. 23 faces, 23 children, 23 open cases. And in the center of them all, a blurry traffic camera shot of a little girl with blonde hair walking barefoot across a parking lot toward a wall of motorcycles. Underneath the photo, Rachel had written 2 words in black marker. It started. 8 months changed everything and nothing. Cole Brannigan still rode the same Harley, still wore the same leather vest, still had the same ink crawling up his arms, and the same scars mapping the landscape of a life lived without guardrails. The Nashville chapter still met at Ironside on Friday nights, and the jukebox still played Too Much. Waylon Jennings and Bear still burned the burgers when he got distracted, telling war stories nobody asked for. But there was a small purple toothbrush next to Cole's in the bathroom of his apartment on Gallatin Road, a pair of tiny rain boots by the front door, a stuffed bear named Sargent sitting on a shelf next to a framed photograph of a woman Cole had never met, Megan Dawson, age 21, smiling at a camera in what looked like better days. Gracie had found the photograph folded inside the lining of Sargent's back during her second week with Cole, tucked away by a mother who must have known on some level that exists below language that the bear might outlast her. "That's Mama," Gracie had said, holding up the creased photograph. "She put it in Sargent so I'd always have her." Cole framed it the same day, drove to the store, bought a $5 frame, placed it on the shelf at exactly Gracie's eye level. Because a child should be able to see her mother's face whenever she needs to. Not on a schedule, not with permission, whenever. The 90-day review came and went. Helen Garrett conducted the home study herself. She walked through Cole's apartment, opened every cabinet, checked the smoke detectors, asked questions that ranged from reasonable to invasive. "Do you have any history of substance abuse?" "No." "Have you ever been arrested?" "Twice." "Bar fight in 2008. Charges dropped." "Disorderly conduct in 2011. Paid a fine." "Do you have any experience with children?" "I have a daughter, Savannah. She's 11, lives in Oregon with her mother. I lost custody when she was 4. Helen looked up from her clipboard. "You lost custody of your own child, and you're asking to take custody of someone else's." Cole met her eyes. "I lost custody because a judge decided my lifestyle was incompatible with raising a child. Not because I hurt her, not because I neglected her, because I ride a motorcycle and wear a patch. I'm not asking you to agree with that decision. I'm asking you to look at what's in front of you right now." What was in front of Helen was a clean apartment, a stocked refrigerator, a child's bedroom painted lavender with sunflower decals on the wall, and a 3-year-old girl who had gained 4 pounds learned to count to 20 and slept through the night every single night since moving in. Helen signed off on the review. Temporary guardianship extended. But Cole knew temporary wasn't enough. Temporary was a leash. Temporary meant another hearing, another review, another opportunity for the system to reconsider. He needed permanent. He called Vivian Cross on a Tuesday. "I want to adopt her." Vivian was quiet for 3 seconds. "Cole, do you understand what that process looks like for someone with your background?" "I don't care what it looks like. It's going to be invasive. They'll pull your military records, your medical records, your financial records. They'll interview your neighbors, your chapter brothers, probably your ex-wife. They'll dig up every mistake you've ever made and put it under a microscope. Let them dig." And Lorraine Finch could contest. She still has standing as a biological relative even after the judge denied her placement. Let her contest. Vivian filed the adoption petition on a Wednesday. By Friday, the news had spread through the Nashville chapter, and then through the Tennessee chapters, and then through a network that stretched across 4 states and 600 men who had been awake on a single October night because a little girl whispered. Walt called Cole on Saturday morning. "Hammer, I need you at Ironside, 1 o'clock. "What for?" "Just come." Cole arrived at 1 with Gracie on his hip and Sargent tucked under her arm. He walked through the front door and stopped. The bar was full, not Friday night full, packed, standing room only, Leather and denim and tattoos and beards and the particular silence of men who are trying not to cry in front of each other. Men from Nashville and Memphis and Knoxville and Chattanooga. Men who had driven hours to be here. Men Cole hadn't seen in years standing next to men he had never met. Walt stood behind the bar with an unlit cigar and an envelope. "What is this?" Cole said. "This is your family doing what families do." Walt held up the envelope. Every chapter in Tennessee, plus chapters in Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, and Virginia, passed the hat this week. For legal fees, for the adoption, for whatever Gracie needs. He set the envelope on the bar. $47,000 hammer. And more coming. Cole couldn't move. "That's not all," Walt continued. "Nate Pritchard called me yesterday. The FBI case the trafficking ring Gracie blew open went federal. 23 children recovered across 3 states. 8 arrests. Detective Wade Holt taken into custody for conspiracy and obstruction. The U.S. Attorney's Office is calling it the biggest takedown in Tennessee in a decade. And it started because one of our brothers knelt down in a parking lot and listened." Gracie tugged Cole's sleeve. "Why is everybody looking at us?" Cole's throat was so tight he could barely push the words through. "Because they're proud of you, darling." "What, because you were brave?" Gracie considered this. Sargent was brave too. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, the kind that comes soaked in tears, the kind that breaks the tension of grown men standing shoulder to shoulder trying to hold themselves together. Bear stepped forward. His eyes were already red. "Hammer, the boys and I talked. We want to do something permanent, not just for Gracie. For every kid like her. Every kid sleeping under a bridge. Every kid running from a black car. Every kid who doesn't have anybody to whisper to." Walt nodded. "We're starting a fund. Chapters across 4 states are committing annual contributions. Shelters, legal advocacy, emergency placement for at-risk children. We're calling it the Whisper Fund." Cole looked at Gracie. Gracie looked at Cole. "What's a fund?" she asked. "It's a promise. A big promise from a lot of people. Like your promise that you'd stay in the chair." "Yeah, darling, exactly like that." Gracie nodded with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Then it's a good promise." Walt raised his glass. Every man in the room raised his. No toast was spoken. None was needed. 2 weeks later, Cole received a phone call he was not expecting. It came from Oregon. "Cole, it's me." He knew the voice. He had heard it in his dreams for 7 years, sometimes angry, sometimes crying, always fading, before he could answer. "Christine." "How'd you get this number?" "Savannah gave it to me." "She found you on the news. The trafficking story. Your name was in a Nashville paper. She showed me." Cole sat down at the kitchen table. Gracie was in her room reading or pretending to read a picture book to Sargent, narrating each page in a voice that combined absolute authority with complete fabrication. "What do you want, Christine?" "Savannah wants to talk to you." Silence, the kind of silence that has a sound like the ringing after an explosion, like the hum of a wire pulled too tight. "Cole, did you hear me?" "I heard you. She's 11 now. She asks about you. She's always asked about you, even when I told her not to." Christine paused. "I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things." Cole pressed his hand flat against the kitchen table to stop it from shaking. "You told the court I was dangerous. I know what I told the court. You said a Hell's Angel couldn't be a father." "I know what I said, Cole. I'm not calling to defend it. I'm calling because our daughter saw your name in a news article about saving children, and she cried for an hour, and then she asked me to call you. So I'm calling." Cole closed his eyes. 11 years old. Last time he saw her, she was 4, screaming his name as Christine carried her to the car. He remembered the sound of that scream the way burn victims remember fire. Total, consuming, permanent. Put her on. A shuffle, a breath, then a voice. Older, steadier, but underneath it unmistakable. Dad Cole pressed the phone against his ear so hard the edge cut into his skin. "Hey, Savannah, I saw what you did with the little girl." "Yeah. Is she okay, Gracie?" "She's okay. She's right down the hall. She's reading to her bear." Savannah laughed. It sounded exactly like it had when she was 4. Bright and sudden and full of something the world hadn't managed to crush yet. "Dad, I want to meet her." "Can I meet her?" "I'd like that, Savannah. I'd like that more than you know." "And Dad?" "Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner." Cole pressed his fist against his mouth. He didn't trust his voice. He didn't trust anything except the feeling that his chest was cracking open for the second time in 8 months, and what was pouring in this time was not pain. "You found me right on time, sweetheart." He hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then Gracie appeared in the doorway holding Sergeant. Cole, who was on the phone. "My daughter." Gracie tilted her head. "You have a daughter. Yeah. Is she nice?" "She's wonderful." "Is she coming here?" "I think so. Someday soon." Gracie walked over, climbed into the chair next to his and placed Sergeant on the table between them. "Then Sergeant needs another chair for when she visits." Cole looked at this child, this 3-year-old survivor who had walked out of the dark and into his life and rearranged every broken thing inside him without even trying. And he understood something that no courtroom, no home study, no legal document, no custody ruling could ever capture or contain. Family isn't blood. It isn't paperwork. It isn't a judge's signature or a grandmother's claim or a birth certificate filed in a county office. Family is who answers when you whisper. On a Friday night in June, 8 months and 12 days after a barefoot girl walked across a parking lot and changed everything, Cole Brannigan sat on a small wooden chair in a lavender bedroom and listened to Gracie Dawson read the alphabet. She got stuck on Q. "What comes after Q, Cole R? Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Sergeant thinks it's S. Sergeant's close." "But not this time." Gracie giggled and continued. "She made it all the way to Z. And when she finished, she looked up at him with those gray-blue eyes. Still enormous. Still watchful. But different now. Softer. The hunted look was fading. Not gone. It might never be completely gone. But fading the way a scar slowly turns from red to silver, still there, but no longer raw. "Cole." "Yeah, darling. Am I going to stay here forever?" He leaned forward in the small chair. A chair built for a child, but holding a man who had finally found something worth sitting still for. "Forever, Gracie. You promise?" "I promise." She held up Sergeant. "Sergeant says he promises too. Then that makes 3 of us." Gracie lay down, pulled the blanket to her chin, and closed her eyes. Cole reached over and turned off the bedside lamp, the one shaped like a sunflower that Joe had given her on her first night in the apartment. In the dark, Gracie's voice came one last time. "Cole." "Yeah, I'm glad I whispered." He put his hand on her head, felt the warmth of her, felt the absolute trust of a child who had learned that the world could be cruel and had decided to believe in it anyway. "Me too, kid, me too." He sat in that chair until her breathing slowed and steadied and became the rhythm of a child who truly knows, that someone will be there when she opens her eyes. Outside Nashville hummed its usual hum. Traffic on Gallatin Road. A distant siren. The low rumble of a motorcycle somewhere in the dark. Probably one of the brothers. Probably someone keeping watch. Probably someone who remembered. 600 men had answered a whisper. One man stayed. And in a lavender room with sunflowers on the wall, a little girl with a one-eyed bear slept without fear. Not because the world had become safe, but because someone had finally made her a promise and kept it. Every night, every chair, every whisper answered. That is what family means.